Hello and welcome to Snide's Return, a tabletop roleplay podcast. My guest today has sparked into life a world of phantom intrusions. Their creativity has raised the roof and then risen from the ashes to bring us a game of loss, destruction, and the reflection of self when all the rest of life's clutter is burnt away. Here to fan the flames of promotion, creation, dedication, and inevitable destruction is my guest, game producer, author, blogger of Arnamantle website and Burnaway TTRPG, Nagi. Nagi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm very excited to talk to you about Burnaway and all the other things that you're involved with. Nagi, before we do get onto those things I've alluded to there in the introduction, would you mind letting us know how you got into tabletop role-playing games, please?
Yeah, of course. At this point, I would say I've been playing tabletop games for half my life, a little over now. I was, I think, 12 years old when I first set foot in my local game shop, and I was very excited because even though I was 12, I was apparently one of the cool kids because there was a sign on the door that said only 13 and over may be accompanied without an adult. But the owner was cool about it, so he let us in.
Nice.
And that was basically where I picked up my first 3.5 D&D player's handbook, and the first time I got to be in a campaign with my friends and kind of just explore not only D&D but some kind of things like White Wolf and Hackmaster and things like that. So really, it just kind of continued on from there in throughout junior high school, college, and beyond. Really, it's always been kind of this thread of my life that has affected my decisions of what I want to do with my free time, what I want to do with my increasing professional time, and the kinds of media that I like to consume and the kinds of people I like to hang out with. So it really is just a big theme of my life.
All right. And so you mentioned sort of stepping on the conveyor belt that is TTRPGs at D&D sort of 3.5 and White Wolf. Where did your TTRPG journey sort of go from there? What have you played other systems, or have you stuck with particular systems as you sort of grown and developed through sort of college and your more
Yeah.
mature years?
Well, at first it was mostly D&D because of course, even I think more than now. Back then, it's like D&D was, kind of the king if you just got into RPGs. And it was like, oh, there's other things besides D&D? What? That's crazy. But the game that I think that my most consistent play group worked with over the years is actually Savage Worlds.
Okay.
And that was kind of like we did a lot of very long running campaigns in that. So that kind of took over once we sort of started moving away from D&D. We did a lot of old World of Darkness stuff using Vampire and Hunter and Promethean and all that stuff like that. And we've tried various kind of other lesser known systems to see what's out there. Right now, like, unfortunately, we haven't had too much time to really jump into all the stuff that's been released in the past few years because there's just
Yeah.
like so much of it. But yeah, that's mostly those have kind of been our core systems, and then I started experimenting with making my own game systems when I was in kind of like high school and much more so in college.
All right. So when you were developing these systems, did any get released, or has that been a later sort of development in your game production sort of life?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess released would be the word for it because the game system that I started making when I was in high school was, I think, the starting point was where a lot of other people start, which is like, oh man, I play a lot of D&D, but I hate these things about D&D, so I want to make my own system that's not D&D but is kind of D&D. So that's where I started, and I started that in high school, and in college I had at that point produced a version of that game system that allowed me to run a campaign based on that system for about 1.5 years.
Wow.
And that is actually kind of the bones of that are still present in the current version of my general open source SRD game. And I ultimately ended up publishing that or releasing that SRD on kind of the previous iteration of my website back in 2017 or 2018, but that's at this point kind of an old document.
Okay. Will you ever revisit it, update it, new sort of sensibilities and a new eye on game development? Because we're about to get to the hot topic, pun intended, of why you joined us. But will you go back to that and revisit it, or are you happy with the fact that you have taken that through its production workings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm never happy with my product because there's always something I want to be adding to or doing better or like just updating it. So it definitely is a continual work in progress, and as we'll discuss, I'm sure soon, various parts of the Burnaway system were actually taken from this kind of like central SRD game system that I have. But it is also in its own right a separate thing that I definitely am looking forward to doing some major overhaul and update in like either this year or maybe next year.
All right. Well, let's talk about the burning elephant in the corner. Then I'm just going to keep throwing these on there.
Amazing.
More fuel to the fire, I guess. Burnaway.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the initial concept come from? And actually, before we get into concept, could you give us like a short sales pitch of what Burnaway
Yeah.
is? Since we're here to promote the game, the Kickstarter, and all that sort of thing, a short sales pitch, please.
Yeah. So basically, Burnaway is a like role playing game that is set in kind of a I like to kind of call it like a post apocalyptic, but it's not like fully post apocalyptic. It's near future where the problems of today have not been solved and are kind of like exacerbated in terms of just like kind of like climate crisis and over kind of like intense cityification of the world and sort of like social stratification and all that other stuff. So kind of like a darkish near future.
Okay.
And basically, there are these certain kinds of ghosts or spirits that they're tethered to the world so tightly that they're kind of like spiritual energy actually spontaneously combusts and lights wherever they're haunting basically goes up in flames. And these particular creatures are called embergeists, and basically the regular fire departments don't really have a way of dealing with them. It's like they're hired to go in and rescue people from regular fires, not to fight a creature that is actively burning the place down. So the market provides, and thus we have these special kind of mercenaries called burnaways who are basically just hired to go in and specifically take care of the embergeist and to basically remove it from the premises, whether that be through exorcism or a process called placation, where they basically have to figure out who was this person, what are their emotional ties to the world, and how can we undo them so they're willing to like just basically go away on their own.
I mean, wow. Wow. So we'll touch on influences in a minute, but the game, from reading the sort of the playtest material, and again something we'll touch on again very shortly, but reading through the material, this game deals with some heavy themes, some real, I won't say darker themes. It's not horror or anything quite like that, but there are some,
yeah, heavy themes I think is a good term for it.
So what has it been like? Where did you draw some influences to bring that element into the game, and what has it been like to sort of, through the game's creation and production, sort of work through those themes for you?
Yeah. I don't know if there was like one particular kind of like eureka moment where I'm like, oh, this game will have this, and this about it. I think it sort of started with a vision, a kind of like, idea and aesthetic of these flaming ghosts, and then people kind of having to encounter them and save people while there's, this creature that they have to deal with. But um, because when I'm thinking about, why are people playing this role playing game, I'm thinking about, what kinds of things do they want to be exploring about their character? What kinds of things do they want to be interacting with? Obviously, everyone comes to a game for a reason. A lot of people come to D&D because it's cool to be a super, powerful wizard or fighter
Mm.
and like just, go around and get rich and fight stuff. But obviously, each game has its own thesis about, why am I playing this game? And I think honestly, in the past few years, we've seen really incredible outside the box thinking of these creators saying, well, I want to explore this interesting little niche of human experience,
Yeah.
and to do that I'm going to like take this thing and create a game that people might not even think of as a game traditionally speaking.
Mm.
So I think I was a little bit inspired by what other people are kind of doing in the space, just because like you know what is a when is a game, when is a game not a game. But um at my core I still would consider myself kind of a more traditionalist gamer. I just really like kind of building a character, seeing that character grow, working together with other characters, and having a good time role playing. That's like um, just kind of what makes me happy as a role player. So I guess when it comes to just like what's the meat, what's the thing that really is engaging the players, it's um, the choices that they're going to encounter of you know uh, does your character decide to sacrifice this part of their personal, their morals, their safety, something like that? Are they going to betray the authorities they're answering to in order to maybe go and do something very selfless or very selfish?
Mm.
I really want to give people the space to play around with that, because these characters don't have to be heroes. This isn't lawful good or whatever D&D.
Yeah.
I want to give a bit more space for people to kind of play around with. You can make a really awful character who's like, just morally really kind of crap, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And exploring that, I think, is really interesting. So I think that ultimately I wanted to make a game that created a huge range of opportunity of potential stories that can be told from a relatively straightforward setup of here's your guys, here's this ghost, the building's on fire, what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and as you say, and we'll get into the character creation and game mechanics in just a little bit, but being able to create the complex characters that we are as human beings, rather than sort of very straight down one particular path or another, having to rely on alignment, is engaging at the very least for myself, definitely. Sort of seeing that ability to maneuver within a character's concept, which is something that comes up in the Burnaway TTRPG. Um, you said there was no initial sort of flashpoint. Again, I'll try and lay off the puns. An initial sort of flashpoint that sort of inspired you to create it, but what are some of the influences
Hmm.
that you sort of brought in? Because I'm picturing a few and I could be way off the
Yeah,
mark. So I'm interested to hear what some of your
yeah.
influences were as you sort of built the game from the ground up.
Well, like I mentioned before, it's like the aesthetic was what kind of like settled into my mind first. And I feel like this is a bit of a misnomer because I'm not actually sure what you would classify this aesthetic is. I think it's a bunch of different aesthetics that have all kind of conflated in my mind, but
Mm.
I kind of call it like retro future punk or retro cyberpunk, where it's specifically this period right around late 90s, early 2000s sci-fi and sort of like modern fantasy aesthetic
Mm.
that was built around, we were entering the digital age, and there was a lot of like, oh man, computer's going to do all this stuff. We're going to have, it's like the world's going to look so different in 20 years, but we didn't really know exactly how it was going to look. So this was like our best guess.
Mm.
It's kind of like honestly, like I I don't want to say this was like was a huge like influence, but obviously in the cultural zeitgeist, like The Matrix, right
Yeah.
around that time was like
Mm.
the sci-fi aesthetic that you couldn't really escape, right?
No,
Um,
fair.
and but for me specifically, I would say there was this early aughts anime called Witch Hunter Robin, where it didn't involve like burning ghosts, but it was more about characters who had witch-like powers who were in an organization to try and hunt down and subdue other witches who were considered kind of like dangerous or deviant. And a lot of the that sort of like core struggle of like, oh, this isn't a criminal, this isn't somebody who's necessarily intending to hurt people, but you know in the moment you have to make the choices of whether you need to subdue them because they are dangerous, or whether like, oh, maybe we need to find a different way to solve this, to really kind of get that moral balance going on. And also, one of the main characters does have these kind of fire powers, so flames and stuff like that is actually kind of a visual aesthetic of it. But it also had a lot of that like retro future kind of like architecture and equipment. Everything was very like bulky and kind of like had like exposed wiring, and just like I'm like, yeah, that that particular aesthetic is really stuff that I really like. Also stuff like Ghost in the Shell
Mm.
and a couple other like shows and stuff like that from around that era was really what all fed into this initial idea, this initial aesthetic.
Yeah, no, I love it. Those influences, inspiration, those aesthetics you've mentioned, definitely touchstones of mine. So I'm very happy you mentioned a number of them. Very happy with that. So before I'm going to do this now, yes. Before we
Mm.
sort of dig into the game mechanically, if the description of Burnaway has sort of sparked your imagination, those at home listening, then Nagi, where can we find you and everything you're associated with, please?
Yeah, well, right now we've got the obviously the Kickstarter is currently up. So if you just go Kickstarter, I believe it's like Kickstarter/project/Burnaway, or just a Google search will get you there very easily. I would say that the Kickstarter page has the most kind of like concise, exciting stuff to read about. If you're really looking for some bullet points on the game and our process. But also, I definitely like to direct people to the Arnamantle website, which is just arnamantle.com and then /Burnaway. And you'll see a bunch of similar stuff. You'll get to see a lot of cool artwork and
Mm.
similar kind of just like bullet points of the mechanics and stuff like that. So I would generally say those are the best places to check them out.
All right. Well, I will make sure there are links to those sites and also yourself on Twitter and wherever else we can find,
Yeah.
including those who are associated with the project. I will make sure there are links to those individuals who we'll touch on again a little bit later. But so please scroll down, follow those links, support the Kickstarter. If this is after the Kickstarter, please follow the links to purchase Burnaway. It looks fantastic. Something that I'm definitely looking to pick up, which is why I'm so glad you agreed to come on, Maggie, to be
Yeah.
fair. So Burnaway as a TTRPG, as a tabletop role-playing game,
Mhm.
take us through some of the mechanics and how the game sort of mixes this sort of tragic sense of loss with the game mechanics and how the two tie together to give us that immersive and enjoyable experience.
Yeah. So the the concept is that the game can be, like you can do longer campaigns, but also I really wanted to make a game that, you can do for a one shot, you can do for a short campaign as well. So
Mm.
I tried to I each session is supposed to be balanced around a single mission, and each mission is split into three parts. There is the briefing, the mission, and the aftermath. And obviously, the briefing is kind of where you learn about the details. It's like, oh man, this house is on fire, and these things are happening. And usually, the briefing will happen if your characters have like a headquarters that they have, or it might just be happening in the van on the way to the mission. But that's basically, mechanically speaking, that's the time when the characters choose their loadouts. They figure out what gear they're going to be taking in. It's also the time when, if you have a new character coming into the party, that's when you would introduce them and kind of
Mm,
maybe have a bit of a back and forth role playing vignettes. The mission's obviously the meat of the game, where you're, like you've got you've got your gameplay split into rounds. You're taking your actions. You're fiddling with all your dice and stuff like that. And whatever ends up happening in the mission, whether you succeed or you fail, depending on what those parameters might be for the mission dossier itself or the character's personal goals, all of that stuff is kind of dealt with mentally in the aftermath, which is kind of like maybe the hours after or the days after. But that's kind of where you have this choice for characters to either kind of take some time to process, possibly the traumatic or the tragic things that have happened to them or to other people within the mission.
mm,
And managing grief is actually a very big part of the game. You can also form bonds with other characters, so if like, oh, we really worked well together during that mission, you can actually get mechanical benefits from creating bonds. And the very last thing is basically a phase called coming to terms, which means you make this mechanical roll, and a factor of that is your current level of grief, which carries over from previous, missions.
okay.
And if too much grief has built up, it actually makes it very hard to succeed at this coming to terms check. And if you don't succeed, your character has to basically isn't able to process things in a way that will help them keep going in this
Right.
line of work.
Mm,
I try to leave that very open ended because we're dealing with pretty heavy themes that some players might have very personal experiences with, and I don't want to say like, oh, this is the one way this is, or this is obviously like this. Everyone
of
has
course.
their own personal experiences, and I don't want to disrespect any of that. So I want people to bring what they want to the table in order to play that as faithfully as they want to. So in that way, I kind of try to use relatively generic language there.
Yeah, of course. And so we've mentioned sort of stepping through in these different phases of play. I guess the next, for me anyway, I'm
Mm.
not the most logical person, but the next logical thing then is to understand how our specialist firefighter slash mercenary slash potential scumbag, uh, or sort of altruistic, helpful person on the team.
Mhm.
Again, the game allows for such a spectrum, but how do we create our characters within the Burnaway TTRPG?
Yeah. So in the character creation chapter, kind of my first thing is like just start with a concept. Like try and think of even just one thing that you want your character to involve or include. It might be you know their motive. It's like, oh, I want to have a character who's trying to have some personal redemption. I like playing those kinds of characters. Or
Mm,
maybe you want to have a character that's like gameplay wise is I want someone who's going to be really fast and is able to get around and kind of help people out like that. Or maybe you just want to play a guy with a big axe. Like, great, that's a starting point. And so before you kind of get to any particular like raw numbers of the character, there's also a feature called the motif triad.
mm,
And very in matching with the aesthetics, the three values of the motif triad are spark, flame, and ash. And I have throughout the design process, I've been kind of like what those values do and how they interact with the mechanics has changed a lot. So it's been kind of tricky to figure out exactly where I wanted them.
right,
But as of right now, they are meant to help you guide your character's actions and reactions as they are going through these sessions and as they are interacting with other characters. So, for example, Spark is all about why is your character here in the first place? Why would they join up with this really dangerous, underpaid, like, kind of thing that most of the people wouldn't do unless they're desperate? And maybe your character is desperate. Maybe they really need money, or maybe they have some other reason to be doing this. So that helps you dig more into that character's motivations. Flame is about kind of the present. If everything breaks down around you, if Plan A does not work out, how do they deal with change? How do they deal with the unexpected? Maybe poorly. Maybe they're, you know, like maybe if everything hits the fan, they're like, yeah, I'm out. Like sorry
Mm.
guys. And Ash is all about confronting the fact that the longer you do this, the more likely you are to basically die in the job, or to be, kind of like uh, harmed or wounded, or put out in such a way that it permanently affects you.
Mm.
Like, why do you keep going if that is the stark reality of it? So I think that those three really big questions help you define the character in a way going forward, and then from there you have your basically your abilities, which your abilities are kind of basically just like a list of 5 skills. Originally I had abilities and skills separate,
Mm.
but I was like, you know what, I'm going to simplify this. I don't like overcomplicating things. Doesn't need to be. So you got your skills, you've got your merits, which are kind of like special extra feats and stuff like that, and you've got your gear, and that's kind of more or less it.
Yeah, I do like the fact the character sheet is on a single piece of paper.
Yeah, that was
That's
one of my goals. I don't like it when it goes
yeah,
over.
yeah. But it's a big win for me when I can see it all on one sheet. So that is another reason why I'm so excited to sort of back and pick this game up for myself and run it for a group. Uh, so uh, the concept of Ash and getting consumed by the job in one way or another, again open to interpretation through play, is such an intriguing concept that I'm looking forward to exploring in one way or another. With respect to the mechanics of the game, what system is this sort of based on,
Hmm.
with respect to the sort of the background mechanics that support the character sheet and Burnaway as a TTRPG?
Yeah. So in the first page or so, the book mentions that it is based on the Sherazade system, which is SHER''ZADE system, which is the current working name of this kind of like universal SRD game system that I had been mentioning earlier
Mm.
in the interview. And it's not like a full on like you know it's it's not a full on like system representation. I basically picked and chose what it was that I wanted to include, and then sort of built on that. So it's kind of like a hybrid system.
Okay.
um, so basically the system doesn't exist anywhere else outside of Burnaway right now. It'd be cool if it did, but at some point. But I would say that it's kind of like a cousin to the full-on Sherazade system.
All right. Okay. Well, yeah, something definitely to look into and get used to as we sort of move through play. If someone was intrigued, and I'm sure people are intrigued by this system and the Shazad sort of gameplay mechanics that you sort of structured the game around, is there anywhere where they could come and maybe try or play test? You mentioned the website having some materials and also on the Kickstarter page.
Mhm.
Uh, Anywhere else that the game is currently being sort of run through?
Um, I for a while I had hosted like kind of the very bare bones SRD document on the Arnamantle website.
Hmm.
But I in the last year I did a really big overhaul on the website, so I'm not 100% sure it is still on there. But if it is, it's like just totally free to go and download. It's like 40-ish pages. And I'm like, right now it's like it's not, I would consider fully up to date, but people are welcome to you know try it out. The Sherazade system itself is built around this concept of open like an open concept modular system where the the main rules are really bare bones, really generic, and because the thing that I want to have happen with it is I want people to create their own modules for it that they can then add on to the base system. So eventually you can just use it for pretty much anything you want to. So for example, if you want to play a very like high energy, very kind of like pulpy game, the system allows you to do that with
Mm,
the core system, and then maybe you can have some modules that make damage really easy and like make the like combat really fast. But if you're the kind of person who like loves to like break down combats into seconds and love, it's like, oh man, I'm using a broadsword, not a longsword, that is that gives
yeah.
me some bonus or whatever. The system can also be used for that. You just have to add on the right modules to it. And it's kind of like almost this concept of like, like like open source Linux in some ways, where it's just like everyone can make their own little widgets and little, like forks and everything like that. And
Mm.
if you really want to build a game that does a very specific thing, all you have to do is go into the community and find all the little modules you want, stick them together, and you've got the perfect game system.
Oh, amazing. You mentioned community. Is there a community for Burnaway at the moment?
I think we're slowly making one. I am I'm not a person who likes to spend a lot of time on social media, like for myself personally, or
Mm,
trying to do promotion of various things. Obviously, it's kind of the way of the world now, but that has been one thing that's been kind of slow to come on. Is just you know getting people to actually know what this game is and look at it, because I'm just not on Twitter like at all unless I'm promoting something.
mm.
So I think, it's been really heartening to see all the people who have been interested and have been like, hey, this is really cool. I want to explore more of this. So I think that there is the beginnings of a community, and I'm hoping that it's going to continue to grow.
Amazing. Yeah. I've been lucky enough to sort of join the Burnaway Discord and
Yeah.
sort of reach out to yourself and the rest of the team. And what a team! To be fair, the there is around the Burnaway TTRPG. What's it been like bringing in some of these fantastic people within the community?
A bit surreal. I mean, literally, like just about a year ago, I was just still doing this by myself, and kind of the first person that I brought on was our project manager, Courtney Stover, or Ketra, as
Hmm.
she goes by for her creative stuff. And I sort of knew that, like, I am very like kind of tunnel vision creative person, where I'm like, oh man, I've got all these ideas, and then I'm like, cool, I'm done with it, and then I'm just like, oh, I don't know what to do with it. So like having a project manager who can really like help me think through the steps of what needs to happen in order to produce something has been like necessary. It's just been necessary. It's been incredibly helpful. Um, and it was just, I don't know, it was interesting because I just uh, actually she put out a message on a mutual Discord server, a mutual TTRPG Discord server, about doing some kind of like consulting project manager work for TTRPGs. And I was like, hey, you interested? And we got to talking, and from there it kind of just rolled into like, because she's got like so many connections, because she's
Hmm.
been doing this for a long time. She's got her own podcast. Like, she's kind of got the hookups, whereas I, kind of a bit of a social media hermit, do not. So like she was able to introduce me to like a bunch of our writers, help me figure out the artists, help figure out where to look for people who can do layout and marketing and stuff like that. So it's just
Hmm.
kind of one of those things where it's like one by one people came on, and I was just like, I look around and I'm like, oh my god, we have like a team. We legitimately have a team of people that I am sort of in charge of, and that's wild.
Yeah, no, and I will make sure there are links to
Mm.
Ketra and a few of the team members down in the description below, because they are fantastic creators and a real credit to the community, and obviously they're doing some fantastic things with your good self for Burnaway. So moving from really good people and sort of good creativity into the Embergeist for their destructive properties. What has it been like sort of coming up with those for us to come up against as a team for those that are going to play Burnaway?
The Sorry, can you say a little bit more?
So the Embergeist are
Mm.
the antagonists. So
Yeah.
what has it been like creating
Mm.
and what has been the most fun or interesting Embergeist that you feel is going to appear in Burnaway?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. It's been interesting because whenever I'm creating Embergeist, I want to keep in mind like this. Like who who were they before they became this ghost? And the kind of the trickier detail that I don't think I've fully managed to figure out how to convey easily is that this isn't just a straight up ghost that's just got a person's memories and is kind of like just an Obi-Wan R2D2 like version of them.
Hmm.
This is more of a emotional imprint left behind by the Embergeist's former ID. So it's more of a creature that than a full-on like spirit of a person.
Hmm.
And because of that, it's not really something that you can directly use logic or reasoning with because it's acting on pure emotion. And so for example, if like you had an Embergeist whose former ID, they're kind of like their lasting emotion was, the fear or like anger of like maybe like losing, for example, their house,
Hmm.
and then the Embergeist appears. That Embergeist would probably act on that anger and that fear and be like, no one gets near this house because it's mine. um and even if the former ID, the former person, didn't actually want to harm people because of it, that's not really transferred through. It's just the raw emotional,
Right.
emotions that this creature is acting upon.
Hmm.
So it makes it a little bit more of a complex puzzle of how to deal with it. And the fact is, you can just exercise. You can just overwhelm it. You can overpower it. You can just say, you need to leave. You need to get out of here. You can't be here anymore. But there might be some people who really want to try and understand, you know, why this creature appeared in the first place, and therefore there's always going to be, within a mission, there's going to be signs which basically connect this creature to someone who died probably relatively recently, and allows their characters to have a different way of and usually a less violent way of dealing with this thing that used to or kind of was connected to a human.
Hmm.
um, so kind of in that vein, I don't necessarily want to use examples of ones that you might end up playing in a game with.
Well, fair enough.
But I can give examples of like actually, we have a few Embergeists that were written by a couple of our excellent writers. For example, we've got D'Angelo Murillo,
Hmm.
who wrote about this Embergeist who whose former ID was the kind of like ex-girlfriend of this hockey player. And so then the Embergeist appears at this like hockey rink, and in a kind of really interesting twist, instead of flames, it's actually kind of made of like cold fire.
Okay.
So I think there's like a lot of really interesting, like, different ways an Embergeist can be portrayed, because it could just be like a flaming skeleton. That's a pretty easy visual. But
Hmm.
I really want people to be like really get creative with it. It's like, what other aspects, like it could look like an animal. It could, you know, uh, be a body that splits into lots of different parts. It could be, something that doesn't really have a fully corporeal form and more like takes possession of the building that it's in. So I really want just people to like really like go wild with their imaginations, and in how this like uh, enlivened spiritual being
Hmm.
can form.
Yeah, no, it all sounds um, inspirational and good stuff, and the the sort of the flip of the ice rink is particularly clever. So
Mm.
that's that that's yeah, I enjoyed that. That was good. So you clearly have spent a lot of time and dedication working on and creating Burnaway. But on the Arnamantle website, you have other things out there for us
Mm.
to sort of enjoy and take in. So what have been some of your other creative outputs?
Yeah. The other, so basically the other TTRPG that I have published on my own kind of before Burnaway is a zine-based game called Stars Fall Up. And kind of the subtitle was a TTRPG for us damn millennials. Although I wrote this back in like 2015, so back when I was a bit more of a younger, a younger millennial. And I mean, it's like I think anybody who enjoys it, who resonates with it, should absolutely play it. But it's also just like, I'm not in my 20s anymore, unfortunately. Maybe not unfortunately, but
Hmm.
it's basically all about a game of just um, being all the characters are sort of in this kind of like slightly like fantasy-ish modern world where like I sort of call it a fantasy that's just a little bit left of reality where maybe you still have an apartment and you still have to go to a job that you hate, but also like there's like whales in the sky, or you've got like dragon fire fuels the cars, but
Hmm.
unfortunately like oh man, you still have to pay your rent. So it kind of like plays around with with the world that and
Hmm.
it's like the ultimate idea is that you go through a day in your life, which might involve going to work, it might involve hanging out with your friends, it might involve dealing with some uncomfortable social issue, but the idea is that you're all kind of doing this same day together, and you actually um, basically get more points and get more stats the more that you kind of interact with each other and kind of like help each other
Okay.
out and bolster each other. So it's kind of just supposed to be this small kind of cozy game about getting through life together.
Hmm.
Um, and aside from that, there's a couple of sort of graphic based projects that I did before. One of them is called Lore Post, which is just very simple, straightforward snippets of like world building that anyone is free to incorporate into their games or, whatever else. The other one is called Chaotic Youthful, which is basically a collection of quotations that I saved from a 7-year long game that I ran for, at the time, a bunch of elementary schoolers.
Hmm.
I used to work in an elementary school, and we did an after school program, and then I got to be the first GM for a bunch of kids who were like 11 or 12 at the time, and that was just a really interesting and great and wild experience, and also produced some of the most unhinged role playing quotes I've ever heard. So I was fortunate enough to write a lot of them down, and um, we ended up putting them together. And that one I don't charge for because that would feel a little bit weird. So like it's out there for people to enjoy.
And that one's chaotic youthful. Yeah,
Chaotic youthful, yeah.
amazing. And you've also put pen to paper in a more structured format away from the surprises we can have through role playing games for Renner's Crossing.
Yeah.
If you'd like to give us a quick spin on
Yeah.
that, please.
So Renner's Crossing is, yeah, more traditional novel. I classify it as sort of between YA and NA, which is kind of like a new adult genre. And I first came up with a story around 2015, and then spent a lot of time writing it and shopping around at publishers, and eventually it did actually get published in late 2020. And it's basically a contemporary fantasy story about this 16-year-old girl named Rena who lives in upstate New York, and she lives at this kind of foster home called Inglenook with like three dads and just a whole bunch of like foster kids who are, you know, all interesting in their own ways.
Hmm.
And then one day they meet this kind of mysterious person who does the kind of the big reveal, and you know is like, oh, you are a witch, you have kind of this magical bloodline in you from your grandmother who was actually my teacher. And so in all very short order, Rena learns that her past of kind of like this weird these weird mysterious things would happen around her when she was a kid, but she never really knew why.
Hmm.
And now she finds out that it's actually because she has this like kind of magical lineage, and her grandmother actually passed away about 12 years ago from this demon that attacked her house. And she finds out that the demon is now back and coming after her because she is the last member of her family.
Hmm.
And so the core of the book, the main story of the book is basically Rena going along with this other person named Job to who is trying to bring her to this magically fortified rectory deep in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and to basically protect her for
Hmm.
when this demon comes back. But along the way, she's sort of learning about this magical world that was kind of hidden within the mundane one, and meeting other teenage witches, and kind of deciding, you know, it's like, oh, who do I want to be? You know, what kind of witch do I want to be? Um, so basically, the first book is one of three. Then the second one I'm still working on right now, and I'm hoping that in the next couple of years I'll be able to finish the trilogy
Hmm.
and publish all three of them.
Well, exciting stuff, and so definitely something to pick up if that has inspired you as well. So thank you for that. That was
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of fun as a great read. Uh, so between creating TTRPGs and writing and work, do you get much free time?
That is basically my free time. I
Oh,
mean, it's creating. I mean, yeah, just like building systems and designing mechanics is stuff that, you know, my brain does when I'm laying in bed waiting to
mm,
fall asleep anyway. So it's literally just what I do to have fun. It's like what I do to enjoy myself. It's sort of my artistic expression. So, you know, I never really got into TTRPGs because I thought I was, you know, hoping to make money at it, or, you know, being like, you know, oh, this is the thing that I want to get good at. It's just, you know, it's like breathing for me. It's just the
mm,
thing that I do, and therefore I hope I can do it as much as I can.
fair enough. Fair enough. Uh, Nagi, we have sort of covered a fair amount. Your introduction into and your sort of carry through for TTRPGs, the inception, creation, and Kickstarter for Burnaway, your writing, and
Mhm.
sort of things in and around the Armonite website. Is there anything we haven't spoken about you want to bring up here just at the end of the interview?
Um, I I'm I don't know. Yeah, it's been a really long, interesting, wild ride from the moment of saying, "All right, I'm really going to do this." You know, I'm actually going to like try and do a Kickstarter for this, to actually being in the middle of the Kickstarter, you know, running this thing. And
Mm.
I just had no idea what I was doing when I started. Just like literally, I'm like, I have no idea what to do. And you know, a year later, I have a little bit more idea of what to do. um, it really is amazing how much I didn't know, and obviously just how much I still don't really know. But it's like it's been such a big step to actually having some idea of, like, you know, I've just gained a lot of experience from this process. And
Mm.
it really has, you know, no matter how the Kickstarter finishes, it really has kind of inspired me to look beyond, you know, what's going to happen here, because no matter what happens, like we will have Burnaway produced in some form in some way. It's like that's a guarantee.
Yeah.
And after that, there's just this laundry list of other projects that I have waiting in the wings, and it's like, probably not all of them will be Kickstarters, but I've got my Arnamantle shops on Drive-Thru RPG and Itch as well, and basically all the games will go up on there. But yeah, I don't know. It's really taught me a lot of things. It's sort of, I'm a very impatient person and a very kind of single-minded person, so I'm just like, all right, I know what I want to have happen. I'm going to make it happen, and if it deviates from that, I'm going to have a hard time dealing with that. But I think actually doing this process of producing this game has really helped me become a more patient person, and also someone who's a bit more adaptable when the thing that I thought was going to happen does not, and being like, all right, well, we're going to figure out what to do next. So yeah, it's just like, wow, when we first started this, I was sort of calling myself, almost, I was almost not even comfortable calling myself, a TTRPG creator, because I'm just like, what does that mean? And now it's like, oh, I actually have some skills. I have some experience. Like, yeah, that's what that's what the label means, I guess, now.
Yeah, fair. And I think you have great skills, by the way, Burnaway reads. So, well, many other people think so too, as the backing continues. At time of recording, the backing continues for the Burnaway TTRPG Kickstarter, which, boosting back to that, Nagi, where can we find your good self and everything you're associated with, please?
Yeah. So as far as social media goes, it is at Arnamantle on Twitter. It's the same on Instagram and Facebook, on Tumblr if you are like me, one of those people. So those are our main social media channels. And of course, again, the Kickstarter is running, and we've also got an email list for people who are interested in hearing about the project that we are going to be doing after Burnaway as well. And I believe you can sign up for that either on the website or on the Kickstarter page directly itself. And usually I update that. I try to update that about once a month, unless something super exciting is happening. So if you wanna get the most up to date information, I would recommend signing up for the email list.
All right. Well, links to all of that will be in the description below this podcast, as well as the links that we mentioned before. Some of the other Burnaway team members, Ketcher, for example, links will be down in the description below. Nagi, it's been a real pleasure to have you on and get to talk about your TTRPG, the Kickstarter for Burnaway. I'd love to get you back on the show in the future as different projects and ideas come to fruition, if you'd be willing to come back and join me.
Absolutely. No, this has been fantastic. I honestly just love sitting around and talking TTRPGs, so anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Nagi.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the show, then go to www.snydersreturn.squarespace.com. Alternatively, you can find us over on Twitter @ReturnSnyder. We have a Linktree link in the description of this episode. And if you want to support us, come and join us over on Patreon, and we also have a Discord server. Please leave us a review, because we'd love to learn how to improve the channel and provide better content out for those who are listening. Until we speak again, thank you.